All right, everybody. It says I'm live, so let me know if that's actually the case. And thank you so much for being here on another Monday night where we can discuss some of the things that have happened this previous week, as well as just how much more fuel to the SHTF fire we should expect moving forward, because every single day there's just more happening at this point in time. And I think that's kind of par the course, especially based on the fact that every single conflict that's erupting around the world is just escalating continually. But either way, it's something we have to pay attention to, because as people who want to be prepared, we need to make sure that we're ready for any shocks to the system that may occur due to these new activities. So thank you all for being here. We have AK-47 by AK-47 according to Sherman Sales. Good to know. Harbor Prepper says 5x5. Grisio Nemo says nothing quite like living in the land of ice, snow, and negative 50 wind chills. And I have to agree with that because it's very, very cold here. And if you are a YouTube channel member or a Subscribe Star member, I do apologize. I'm not doing the private live stream tonight just because it's just a little too cold out here. And yes, there's ways I could get around that, of course, but I am also exhausted. So I appreciate you all understanding with the wind and the negative temperatures. My office is not inside my home. I'm doing the best I can out here, right? And I hope you understand that I just don't want to freeze. So thank you all for being here. Let's get things going. I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. And of course, thanks to them, I can come out, do live streams like this, and give you guys information along the lines of preparedness related to SHTF. And I want to mention that Genesis Gold Group also supports the live streams here on this channel. And if you go to magicpreppergold.com, they might be able to help you out with some wealth stabilization, especially when it comes to precious metals assets, because in all honesty, we don't really know what the future holds, but what we do know is historically precious metals seem to at least retain some value. So keep them in mind in case that's something you're interested in. I'm not telling you what you should do because I'm not a financial advisor, but Genesis Gold Group can probably help you out if you want to roll a retirement account into a gold-backed IRA, or if you just want to get large amounts of precious metals delivered right to your door. Whatever you want to do, make sure you check them out at magicpreppergold.com. That's how we get the live stream started, so that we can keep things moving forward here on this channel and keep the information flowing. And I hope you all understand that I am doing the best I can as just a regular dude that doesn't have a camera crew, an editor, or any of the things that other people seem to have here on YouTube. So I guess I'm supposed to have those things, and I haven't figured out how to do it yet. Either way, let's get going, okay? Here is the story that's kind of unfolding currently that we should all be aware of. Iran has made some moves, let's just say that. The IRGC is saying that they have basically bombed some parts of Syria and Iraq based on attacks that happened to them recently, which ISIS took responsibility for. IRGC fires missiles at terror espionage centers in Iraq and Syria. This is like just now happening, and they're shooting ballistic missiles at other countries, right? The Middle East is always a powder keg. However, we're moving very close to a uncontrolled burn, let's just call it, because we all know that that is what you need in order to prevent a forest fire, right? A controlled burn and proper forest management. And right now, the Middle East is an unmanaged forest that has a non-controlled burn currently burning. And that wildfire can spread very easily because there's not much standing in its way, even though we have naval ships in the Red Sea that are ready to respond. This stuff still keeps happening. Now, this is happening like right now, and I just want everyone to be aware of the fact that the Middle East is probably what's going to really kick this whole thing off in a very negative way, especially with it affecting you directly, which we're going to get into here in just a minute. Iran's IRGC announced they attacked espionage centers and gatherings of anti-Iranian terrorist groups in Iraq and Syria before midnight local time on Monday. The Revolutionary Guard issued several communiques saying that the ballistic missile strikes were in retaliation to recent crimes of terrorist groups and killing innocent compatriots in Kerman and Rask. It also singled out Israel for killing the Guard's high-ranking officers and proxy forces in airstrikes in Syria. There are unconfirmed reports that some missiles landed near the U.S.-led International Coalition headquarters and the U.S. consulate in Erbil. Now, Erbil, I believe, is in Iraq. So we have Syria, we have Iraq affected, and we have missiles landing very close to U.S. consulates. No U.S. facilities were impacted by the missile strikes, two U.S. officials told Reuters. Deputy Speaker of Kurdistan's parliament, Hem Harami, said that unjustified attacks in Erbil by the IRGC targeted a civilian house belonging to Pershad Dizai, killing him and 4 members of his family. Desai was a business mogul and head of Falcon Investment Group. In the past, Tehran has accused some Iraqi Kurds of collaborating with Israel. Okay? And we have some of these images coming out right now of these ballistic missile strikes happening in that region. The IRGC was referring to a twin bombing on January 3rd near the tomb of one of its top commanders, Qasem Soleimani, in Kerman, where around 100 people were killed on the 4th anniversary of his killing by a U.S. airstrike in Baghdad. The Afghanistan branch of ISIS took responsibility for the attack that came as a major embarrassment to Iranian security forces. Okay? Now, here's something I want everyone to keep in mind, is that Iran and their partners in the Middle East are not unaware of the fact that ISIS clearly had some outside influence when it came to their original development, let's just call it, right? The IRGC announcement said that it fired ballistic missiles and eliminated the commanders and main elements linked to the recent terrorist operation. It did not explain why the retaliation was against ISIS in Syria and not in Afghanistan. Later, Al Mayadeen Network, affiliated with the Iranian regime, said that IRGC targeted training centers in Syria where Afghanistan ISIS forces were being trained. In its earlier communique, the IRGC did not mention targets in Iraq, but specifically mentioned Syria. However, Iranian media and Iraqi officials said that targets in Erbil were hit. In a later statement, however, the IRGC said it targeted an Israeli espionage center in Erbil. So you see how this is expanding. It's expanding very quickly. And the U.S. consulate is very close to where some of these direct hits are happening. We also have the targeting of Israeli espionage centers. And of course, we have crews on the ground in Syria as well as Iraq where this is all happening. So just be aware that this is the war between Iran and the West, but we're just not being told that that's what it is yet. But that's what we're witnessing currently. We have ballistic missiles being fired. They're not nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, but they're ballistic missiles. Anyway, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, in response to recent aggressions by the Zionist regime resulting in the martyrdom of IRGC commanders and members of the resistance front, targeted and destroyed one of the main espionage centers of the Zionist regime, Mossad, in the Kurdistan region of Iraq using ballistic missiles. This center has been the hub for developing espionage operations and designing terrorist activities in the region, especially in our beloved country, the statement said. Okay? So, and there's crazy videos. If you guys go in and start looking, because if I start trying to roll these videos through, weird stuff happens, right? We all know how this works on this platform at times. But if you go through and you start taking a look at it, you can actually watch people from their balconies filming these ballistic missiles coming in. And they can see them in the sky in their arced trajectory heading towards their targets. And it's very unnerving because you can only imagine how you would feel being in their position watching this happen. And of course, people who live in those areas experience this on a regular basis. So it's just kind of a reminder for how comfortable we are and how good we actually have it over here in the United States or even in the Western Hemisphere in comparison, whereas missile strikes and anti-air defense and everything else is kind of a commonality for a lot of those people. And that's just not the kind of life we want to be living. But unfortunately, as things continually progress in the way they currently are, it might be a future we eventually make our way towards, which I hope is not the case, but we need some serious corrections when it comes to how we're progressing in this current world conflict situation. Okay, so Daryl Calhoun says they're chocolate-tipped missiles, and those would be preferable to any other types of tips I'm sure they have in their inventory. So let's hope that Willy Wonka takes over the IRGC at some point in time. Let's see here. Not sure how much more I can hold. A lot more, folks, says Rocky Stallone. I'm not sure what you're trying to hold, but I do appreciate you hanging out in the chat, and I do appreciate your sentiment. So what else is happening over there? Things and stuff. Nothing to worry about, right? Okay. Houthi missile hits U.S.-owned container ship in the Gulf of Aden. I mean, this is all like today. Like these things are happening right now, and they're all interconnected. They seem like they're singular, individualized news stories, but in reality, all of this is connected to a much larger conflict. And when we look at it through that lens, you can see just how large this fire is starting to become. I'm trying to find the right words because I can't necessarily always describe exactly how detrimental some of these events are going to become for us, right? Now, The Houthi rebels have hit a U.S.-owned container ship with a ballistic missile off the coast of Yemen, the U.S. says. Now, one thing that has me thinking, and you guys let me know in the chat what you think about this, but this is just kind of like my own thought process. But with the use of so many ballistic missiles happening in the Middle East right now, we have ballistic missiles being fired at ships in the Red Sea. We have ballistic missiles being fired from Iran into Iraq and Syria. There's ballistic missiles flying all over the place, right? At what point are these ballistic missiles hard to track or hard to anticipate, especially regarding the use of maybe a biological, chemical, or nuclear warhead on one of these missiles, because they're ballistic missiles. They have capabilities that are further than just conventional, and yet they're flying all over the place. And I don't know if you would be able to anticipate one of them possibly having more to it than just your standard conventional load. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but in the chat, go ahead and feel free to let me know what you think about that. But it's just concerning with how frequently these types of weapons are being used now, more so than just drone strikes, more so than just missile strikes. We're talking ballistic missiles. So anyway, the vessel Gibraltar Eagle reported no injuries or significant damage, according to the United States Military Command for the Middle East. The Marshall Islands flagged vessel is continuing on its journey in the Gulf of Aden. Iranian-backed Houthis, here we are again with Iran, right, being involved in this, attacking a U.S.-owned ship in the Red Sea, right, or in the Gulf of Aden at least. The Iranian-backed Houthis have been attacking ships since November in protest at Israel's war against Hamas. Shipping company Eagle Bulk Shipping said its vessel was carrying steel products and was about 160 kilometers offshore in the Gulf of Aden when it was hit. It said the container suffered limited damage to a cargo hold but is stable and is heading out of the area. Hours earlier, CENTCOM said that another missile fired in the direction of a U.S. destroyer in the Red Sea had been intercepted and shot down by a U.S. fighter jet. Now, just so everyone's aware, there have been other times in history where a U.S. destroyer was damaged during a proxy-like conflict that then pulled us into a much more conventional war, a much more direct action-related war, right? And they're literally shooting missiles at these ships. Like they're not holding back. Maybe they just don't have the best targeting systems. Maybe they don't have the technology to quite get there. Whatever is causing the fact that they're not actually making hits on these naval ships, they are finally hitting these cargo ships, and then these naval ships are still being targeted. At what point in time does something happen that forces our hand to do something additional, right? Like that's how these things go. We look back on some of these incidents in history and say, well, now we know exactly what happened there, but at the time it didn't really matter because next thing you know, you're in a war. The Houthis have been attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea that the group says are linked to Israel or bound for Israeli ports. It says the attacks are a show of support for the Palestinians and Hamas in Gaza as Israel continues its military campaign there. The British maritime security firm Ambre says the Gibraltar Eagle was assessed to not be Israel affiliated, but it was owned by an American company. But a senior Houthi official said on Monday that American vessels were also considered targets. It is enough for ships to be American for us to target them, Nasser al-Din Amer said. The Houthi attacks on cargo ships in the Red Sea have led many of the world's biggest shipping companies to change course, thus causing major disruption to global commerce, which is how this is going to affect us the most directly and the most likely, right? Things are about to get really expensive. And that's just the truth, okay? On Monday, the UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said 13 Houthi launch sites have been destroyed by its military action. The UK and the United States have been striking some of these Houthi targets. Mr. Sunak said that while he would not speculate on future action, doing nothing would have weakened regional security. U.S. intelligence assesses that the joint U.S.-UK airstrikes on the Houthis' military facilities have destroyed about a quarter of their arsenal. So they say. But the Houthis' chief negotiator, Mohammed Abdul Salam, told Reuters news agency that attacks on Israeli ships or those heading to Israeli ports would continue in spite of the U.S.-led airstrikes. Now, it sounds to me like the Houthis are getting marching orders from somebody, most likely Iran, right? And that they are trying to provoke something more egregious or push the U.S. or the U.K. to move further into a military entanglement. And the reason I say that is because, they're literally poking the bear, right? They know what they're doing. They're attacking these cargo ships. They're shooting missiles directly at our U.S. Navy ships. A response is warranted at a certain point, right? But what level of response and how entangled do we become in that conflict during that interaction. And that's something that I would definitely keep an eye on, because there's a reason they're trying to draw us into that. And that should be something you're thinking about as well. It's not just what we decide to do, it's what they're trying to provoke. Something to consider. Now, why is this a big issue? And real quick, I'll jump in the chat here. I know I asked everybody to kind of let me know what you think about all these ballistic missiles. I'm not sure if I missed anything here, but I did see that Wing It with Ethan said it all started with a back massage. And you know what? I could probably see that being the case. No worries. Exile Reviews, thank you for being here. Thank you for modding tonight. I definitely appreciate it. But either way, we're on our way. Things are getting weird. Those missiles can act as scapegoats since their accuracy is questionable at best. They must be aware of this, said Welcome to My Life. Exactly. There's a concern for me that there is a lot of misdirection possible with this. And of course, with the level of missile launches happening and everything else occurring in that regard, it's easy to build that complacency too, or like, oh, you know, they never actually hit their target, or oh, they don't ever have these specialized warfare tips or anything else related to that, right? So that's just me pondering these thought processes, right? Like, this isn't me diving deep into military strategy to understand exactly what it is they're capable of, because I don't have that capability. It's not one of my skill sets, let's just say. But what I am capable of doing is just thinking further than just face value, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do with that. Now, why am I concerned about these container ships being hit with missiles? Because it's going to make everything cost a lot more. This is from January 12th. Okay, so before this American ship was hit by the Houthis, this article was published. Container rates soar on concerns of prolonged Red Sea disruption and inflation. Okay, London, Los Angeles, January 12th, Reuters. You like how I say that different every time? It just makes me feel better. Container shipping rates for key global trade routes have soared this week, with U.S. and U.K. airstrikes on Yemen stirring fears of a prolonged disruption of global trade in the Red Sea, one of the world's busiest routes, industry officials said on Friday. U.S. and British warplanes, ships, and submarines launched dozens of strikes across Yemen overnight, retaliating against Iran-backed Houthi forces for attacks on Red Sea shipping, widening regional conflicts stemming from Israel's war in Gaza. Now, if you haven't figured it out yet, Iran-backed Houthis is a continually pushed here in the media. They want to keep reminding you who backs the Houthis, right? Because they're preparing you to, I guess, be comfortable with the idea of direct conflict with Iran. But don't forget that not just the U.S. plays the proxy war game, right? So we have our proxy war going on in Eastern Europe right now, right? We all know how that's going. So this is the Middle East version of a proxy war, right? And then, of course, if something happens between China and Taiwan, that'll be, in many ways, another proxy war. So this is just what war is now. It's no longer so clear, right? Now it's, well, these groups that are backed by these other entities, but like, it's not them actually doing it. That's just where we are at right now. And we are going to talk about Taiwan here in a minute, but hold off for that. We have other things to discuss as well. Most container ships already were avoiding the nearby Suez Canal, a shortcut between Asia and Europe that handles 12% of global trade. Now, U.S. and U.K. militaries have advised all ships to steer clear of the conflict zone. That stoked fears that rates for oil tankers and bulk carriers that ferry vital commodities could surge, raising the risk of a new round of global inflation. Oh, just what we needed. The benchmark Shanghai Containerized Freight Index was up over 16% week on week to 2,206 points on Friday. The index, which measures non-contract spot rates for container shipments out of China's ports, has gained 114% since mid-December. Rates on the Shanghai-Europe route rose 8.1% to $3,103 per 20-foot container on Friday from a week earlier, while the rate for containers to the unaffected U.S. West Coast soared 43.2% to $3,974 per 40-foot containers week on week. Leading shipbroker Clarkson said on Friday, the longer this crisis goes on, the more disruption it will cause to ocean freight shipping across the globe, and costs will continue to rise, Peter Sand, chief analyst at freight platform Zenida, said on Friday. Not in Friday, but on Friday. Because I can read better than routers can write sometimes, okay? Major players in the ocean shipping industry that that handles upwards of 90% of global trade are bracing for months of cost-stoking upheaval. Understand that that's problematic for us. Even if from today forward the Bab al-Mandeb Strait was to become safe and secure for transit, we expect it will take a minimum of 2 months before vessels could assume normal rotational patterns, said Michael Aldwell, Executive Vice President for Sea Logistics at Cooney plus Nagel, whatever. Okay, so this is going to hurt us financially. This will hurt us right in the wallet. Everything touches a cargo ship at some point in time, basically, right? So everything's already too expensive, but it's just going to get more expensive. It just is, right? So as preppers, people who want to be ready for crises, we want to make sure that we are understanding that our purchase power is going to be limited here in the near future. So that might help you strategize your budget. It might help you strategize prioritization of acquirement of goods, right? Depending on what it is you need. Food, if it's storage, if it's fuel or generators, whatever it might be, prioritizing what it is you need and understanding that the longer that need goes unfulfilled, the more expensive it might become, is just something you have to build into your preparedness plan at this point in time. Everything comes by sea, basically. Most things. So prepare for it to cost more pretty much no matter what it is. That includes, oil, natural gas. It's everything. Okay. So, be prepared, says Magic for Prezi. I don't think I am qualified for that. And that's just because I would say a lot of very unnerving things to the general population if I had that kind of a pulpit. So I'm not sure if anyone's ready for that. I think our presidents should be more transparent and honest with how they speak. That's just my opinion. Or just be able to speak in general. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into something more domestic, right? This is something that I wanted to put on everyone's radar in case you're unaware of it, or just to be keeping an eye on this situation, because it does matter for all of us here in the United States. DHS threatens to take appropriate action against Texas over border access. In case you're not aware, Texas activated the National Guard and took control of a park in Eagle Pass, I believe, which basically is usually the jurisdiction of the federal government through the Department of Homeland Security and Border Patrol. But Texas is tired of them not doing their job and has decided to take matters into their own hands, and in fact has barred access by these federal employees to these areas that they technically have jurisdiction over. So this is a very problematic situation. First off, I get it, Texas. You're supposed to have a secure border. I don't care what anyone says. You're supposed to. It doesn't matter how you feel about our immigration policies or anything along those lines. A non-secure border is no border at all. So Texas is doing what they feel is best. However, this can cause an interesting rift between state-held and federal-held entities, as well as laws and regulations and everything else. And we need to maintain that separation in order to have more control over our localized issues. And this is going to be a test of some of that, as well as the fact that Texas, let's not forget, has talked about secession more than once in the past. So I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but this could escalate into something more, I don't want to use the word interesting, but something more concerning, okay? The Department of Homeland Security has threatened the state of Texas, saying the state is acting unconstitutionally in blocking Customs and Border Protection's access to Shelby Park in Eagle Pass, Texas. And if the state continues to do so, the Justice Department will take appropriate action, according to a letter obtained by ABC News. Texas actions are clearly unconstitutional and are actively disrupting the federal government's operations, DHS General Counsel Jonathan Meyer wrote to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. I don't think Texas cares. We demand that Texas cease and desist its efforts to block Border Patrol's access in and around the Shelby Park area and remove all barriers to access in the Shelby Park area. This is interesting because you would assume they would be grateful for Texas, helping them out with this unrelenting border crisis that has been allowed to exponentially grow more problematic every single day. But apparently, it's a problem for them that Texas is doing this, right? The Biden administration accused the Texas National Guard of blocking Border Patrol agents from accessing a 2.5-mile stretch of the southern border in Eagle Pass, Texas, including Shelby Park. The letter from Meyer, dated January 14th, says Texas has until Wednesday to cease and desist its efforts to block Border Patrol's access in and around the Shelby Park area and remove all barriers to access to the U.S.-Mexico border. If not, Meyer says they'll refer the matter to DOJ for appropriate action and consider all other options available to restore Border Patrol's access to the border. All other options, okay? So look, I'm not here to talk about, every little detail of what's happening at the border, because we all know what's going on there. But here's one thing I will agree with Texas on. Our border is wide open to any foreign adversary that wants to walk right through it, right this second, especially at the southern border. And Texas is activating the National Guard in order to stop that from happening. Now, of course, the media and, of course, the White House and everybody else involved is trying to maintain this idea that the border is just illegal immigrants who are looking for a better life that are just trying to come here in order to make, a better future for themselves, which of course there are some that are doing that, because you can't just eliminate that entire crowd or else you'll have too much of an obvious situation, right? But there are dangerous people, dangerous cartels, and dangerous foreign actors coming in right through our southern border right now. And the right thing to do would be to activate the military or the National Guard to go secure it and enforce the rule of law there in order to stop this threat from entering in our country so easily. And that's what Texas is doing, and that's not what the federal government wants to do, okay? So we don't have to dive too deep into that, but I hope you all understand that there's more to this story than just Texas versus the federal government. There's more to this story than just stopping illegal immigration. There's more to it than just face value, right? Texas has quite a grip on their own sovereignty, let's just call it, right? Especially when it comes to their law enforcement departments, when it comes to, their infrastructure, right? But the other thing to keep in mind is that they have intelligence gathering sources that are far beyond, my capabilities, that might have them concerned to the degree of feeling they had to do something. And that's something you should definitely keep in mind. Let's not forget that the cartels are actively targeting people in communities within Mexico and probably here in the United States with drone strikes, right? And armed gunmen. Which sounds like military action, doesn't it? I mean, it's what's happening in Eastern Europe. It's what's happening in the Middle East. What's wrong with it happening south of the border, right? So, Irradiated Runner says, this feels very Fort Sumter-y. All right, let's see here. And yes, someone did mention that it looks like Trump is going to take the Iowa caucus. Predictable. There you are, right? Also, the stuff happening right now around the world, and as ridiculous as this might sound to some of you, it's relatively predictable at this point in time. It feels that way to me anyway. When I see these things happening, especially in the Middle East, of course that's happening, right? That's kind of how things have developed to this point in time. Now, speaking of the southern border, I made a whole video about this, but I want to go ahead and touch base on it real quick again because it's very concerning to me. The whole situation in Ecuador is very problematic. Ecuador is almost like a crystal ball when it comes to what could be our future. Not being under attack or under invasion from a superpower, not necessarily being hit by nuclear bombs, right? But just criminal elements springing up and creating chaos within our major cities and within our rural communities, and then what, right? They get jailed, and then the corrupt police and the corrupt bureaucrats let them back out, and then rinse and repeat. And that's what Ecuador is experiencing right now, which is why you should probably keep an eye on what's happening there, just as a mental exercise and as a what-if type scenario. What if this is our future? Well, how would I respond to it, and what would I need to do to protect myself, protect my family, and eliminate some of those risks, right? I weep for my beloved Ecuador as it's plunged into deadly anarchy, says ex-president amid cartel chaos. Control of prisons is lost and the state is infiltrated, claims the former nation leader. So this is the former president of Ecuador saying these things, okay? This comes after the current leader declared a state of war on drug trafficking cartels and imposed a state of emergency in response to the series of violent events. Okay, we had all these things happening there recently. I talked about what happened on the news station live as Ecuadorians around the country watched it live unfolding right before their eyes. This is something you see in The Purge, right? This is something you see, like I said in that video, like The Dark Knight. This felt very like Joker-esque, right? Unhinged criminal activity is a very likely future compared to many others out there. Think Demolition Man, right? Think RoboCop. Those are, I know this is just Hollywood, but I'm trying to just give you at least a visualization of what could occur. Rafael Vicente Correa Delgado, 60, served as the president of Ecuador from 2007 and 2017. The ex-president said he has to hold back his tears as he watches his beloved country descend into deadly anarchy. Mr. Correa said, "I have not seen such rapid, deep, serious destruction of a country in times of peace without sanctions, without a blockade." I want you to really think about that. Because currently, regardless of what's happening in other parts of the world, you can consider the United States being at a time of peace right now because we're not technically in a direct conflict where it's affecting us in our borders, like within our borders right now, right? Like if you want to look at it from like that skewer outside point of view, right? Once again, I'm going to say that one more time, because I just want it really to kind of sink in. I have not seen such rapid, deep, serious destruction of a country in times of peace without sanctions, without a blockade. Which means it can happen without those things happening. According to the ex-leader of Ecuador, the international figures show that there were 5.8 homicides per 1,000 inhabitants during his presidency. This number rose to 42 per 1,000 inhabitants in 2023. That means that we went from being the second safest country in Latin America, only Chile beat us, which has twice the per capita income of Ecuador, to being one of the 5 most violent countries in the world. Of total destruction, the former president added. Are there cities in America right now that might meet some of those requirements? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the chat. Ecuador is currently in a 60-day state of emergency, which was announced on January 8th as the nation is coming off its bloodiest year on record. The country's 17 million population find themselves under a curfew enforced by armed soldiers. They are under martial law right now, which they're not calling it that, but it is de facto martial law. The citizens are restricted from moving freely and assembling, while police is allowed to enter homes without a court order. Such drastic measures come from as a response to the rampant violence in the country's notorious prisons, okay? And then it goes over a lot of the stuff I covered in that video. But one thing I want to just mention to kind of like drive home regarding some of that information was the fact that we had the political scientist from Germany basically stating that don't forget, these criminal organizations all lead back to Mexico. They all are intertwined with the Mexican cartels, which are operating right now with impunity at our southern border, who have direct ties to China, who are the reason why fentanyl is flooding into our country. China's supplying it to the cartels are supplying it to everyone within our borders and to other countries as well. And this campaign of chaos and violence that occurs thereafter is part of that equation and part of China's game plan. And what we're seeing in Ecuador right now is the results of that when infrastructure and law enforcement and everything else begins to fall apart to a point where there can no longer be any resistance. And that's kind of where we're at in this country. Look, I don't want to see us in a police state by any means, but our law enforcement has been stripped of the ability to actually be productive against these threats. All they can do now is try to maintain or mitigate some of the issues that are occurring, but they can't actually combat them. And because of that, we are going to constantly see the crime and everything else related to it overcome the capability of law enforcement and eventually overtake. And then that's when you get situations like Ecuador, where you have corrupt police, corrupt politicians, and corrupt bureaucrats who decide that their life is worth more than fighting off this situation. And so they start taking bribes and they start allowing more and more and more to occur. And then those who are within those organizations who are resilient and are there for the betterment of their community are eliminated. That's what's happening there. And that's what's happening in other places too. And that's why it's very concerning to me, because that is the game plan. We're watching it happen in the future in Ecuador. It just hasn't made it that far yet here in the United States. But I'm telling you, like, that's the goal. Right? Okay. Let's see here. Hey, I see people networking in the chat, and that's awesome. We have people talking about like, hey, what part of Missouri are you from, right? So make sure you're networking, make sure you're doing those things, because I think that's very important for us to do at this point in time. It's very hard for us to maintain a level of organization or communication if we don't have networks. And sometimes we need the networks to literally have peace of mind and to have references, right? I need to reference other people sometimes. For example, in my Discord server, at times I'll say, hey, I'm going to try out this thing, and then someone will tell me about something they learned about it before I had the chance to, which might change my mind moving forward on it, right? So like, for example, we were discussing bees, and then I talked about certain hives I was considering, and then apparently they're maybe not the best for cold environments. So now I have more research to do and I have more to look into, but make sure you guys are networking because we need to do more of that. I just put my Discord link in the chat in case that's something you're interested in. It gets spicy in there. I know it is what it is. It's a Discord, but at the same time, you might be able to network with some good people in your area as well. So let's go ahead and talk about, well, Taiwan. Okay, this is interesting, and this is just something I want to kind of give you a hot take on. Okay. Taiwan defies China, electing a new president Beijing labeled a separatist troublemaker. Now, I just want to say real quick, okay, before we jump into Taiwan and that whole situation, here is what separatist means in many ways, okay? No, this is not the Clone Wars we're talking about. Separatists say Moldova wants to use Ukrainian soldiers to plan attacks. Wait, separatists in this context almost sounds like the bad guys, right? Keep that in mind. Separatist is a word that's used specifically to designate somebody, the enemy in many ways, okay? And this is just interesting. I think you should be aware of this, okay? And this is from January 12th. So, Moldova's pro-Russian separatist Transnistria region accused central authorities in the ex-Soviet state on Friday of training Ukrainian soldiers to launch attacks on the rebel area's institution and leaders. Moldova's pro-European government, which denounces Russia's war in Ukraine, immediately denied the allegation. Transnistria split from Moldova before the 1991 Soviet collapse and fought a brief war against the newly independent state lying between Ukraine and Romania. The separatist enclave has existed side by side with Moldova on its eastern fringe for the past 30 years with little turmoil or violence. But tension has risen since the new year. Transnistria, which receives hefty financial help from Moscow and has no international recognition, has denounced the imposition by Moldova's government of import-export duties it says will cripple its businesses. Okay, so we have this whole situation here occurring. The State Security Ministry in Transnistria said more than 60 soldiers, most with experience in the war in Ukraine, were being trained by foreign specialists for the purpose of launching attacks on the separatist region. So if that happens, that creates another front in that war, but it also goes to show you what separatists are being labeled as moving forward into this conversation. But just be aware that whole Eastern European conflict is not going anywhere anytime soon. It seems like it's getting worse, okay? So, Desert 1776 says, I trust my dogs, and I think that's a good idea. Trust the dogs. They will definitely take care of you. I have faith in your dogs. I don't even know your dogs. Anyway, Taiwan, okay? Don't forget, it's being labeled as a separatist, troublemaker, okay? Voters in Taiwan elected Vice President Lai Ching-te, as their next president on Saturday, defying warnings from Beijing not to support a candidate it has called a separatist and a troublemaker. Will this escalate tension in that region? Of course it will. The election, which China had described as a choice between war and peace, oh, well, I guess we know now if it's going to get better or not, could test recent efforts by Beijing and Washington to repair relations that in recent years have fallen to their lowest point in decades. The status of Taiwan, one of the strongest democracies in Asia, is among the most sensitive issues between the two superpowers, and focus will now turn to any potential show of force from Beijing in response. Yep. China claims Taiwan as its own territory and has not ruled out the use of force against the island, while the U.S. is Taiwan's most important international backer. The majority of Taiwan's 23 million people are in favor of maintaining the status quo, neither formally declaring independence nor becoming part of China. Okay, here's what's weird about this. And this is what I want you to kind of keep in mind. Now, this can definitely explode into something huge at any moment. And you know when the best time for that would be? When we're preoccupied, when we eventually send that other carrier strike group over to the Middle East, which I think I said a month or two ago now, would kind of be your red flag of like, oh, we're actually going to war, right? So, and like publicly, if you know what I mean. So just keep an eye on that because, ships are getting hit with with ballistic missiles, and ballistic missiles are targeting our ships, and we're bombing Yemen at this point, right? So, who knows? But anyway, and don't forget Iran is now bombing Syria and Iraq, and missiles are hitting close to U.S. consulates. But it's fine. Everything's fine. But here's what's interesting, okay? We don't support Taiwan independence. That's been our standing policy for quite some time. U.S. does not support Taiwan independence, Biden says. Okay, I'm sure he said that. I mean, he might have said that or tried to say that. U.S. President Joe Biden said on Saturday that the United States does not support the independence of Taiwan after Taiwanese voters rebuffed China and gave the ruling party a third presidential term. Earlier in the day, the Taiwanese ruling Democratic Progressive Party's presidential candidate Lai Ching-te came to power, strongly rejecting Chinese pressure to spurn him, and pledged both to stand up to Beijing and seek talks. Okay. We do not support independence, Biden said when asked for a reaction to Saturday's elections. I don't know if he meant that specifically for Taiwan. I'm not sure if he actually meant that for that country. I think he just said that in general. I think they just don't support independence, right? Anyway, the United States switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing in 1979 and has long said it does not support a formal declaration of independence by Taiwan. It does, however, maintain unofficial relations with the self-governed island and remains its most important backer and arms supplier. Well, we don't support independence, but we'll give you plenty of guns and plenty of bombs and everything else you need in order to, maintain your independence, I guess. But interestingly enough, let's talk about an article from 2022. Why are we doing that? Well, just because. Council of Foreign Relations. While pledging to defend Taiwan from China, Biden shifted on Taiwan independence. Here's why that matters, okay? So where are we on this? Well, I think it depends on which war we decide we want to fight. Because we're going to fight some war. I'm not sure which one they're going to choose yet, or multiple wars they're going to choose, but they got to get out of this mess somehow. When I say mess, I mean our current economy, I mean our current morale, I mean our current state of affairs. Just literally everything is a mess. So the only thing that's worked historically when things are this bad has been war. So which one are we doing? Anyway, back then, September 22nd, 2022, on Sunday evening, President Joe Biden made headlines when he asserted in a 60 Minutes interview that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China were to launch an unprovoked attack. His embrace of strategic clarity, however, was not his most notable comment on Taiwan, since this was the fourth time that Biden has articulated such a commitment. Instead, the comment that will raise more alarms in Beijing was Biden's statement that Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence. That's their decision. While this comment might seem innocuous, it would mark a significant shift in U.S. policy. Now, what I found interesting there is that we're going to supply them with everything they need militarily to deter China if China attacks them. And then back then, Biden said it was fine if they wanted to make their own call on their independence, even though we were going to back them militarily, right? And now he's saying, we don't support that, but we're still going to defend them if China attacks them. What's the point of defending this country if we're not going to support their independence thereafter, right? So this is just kind of to show you the little bit of back and forth that we're having on the global stage right now when it comes to which war we're actually going to fight. And I think maybe there was anticipation of China making a move sooner than they have regarding Taiwan. And maybe that's strategic in the sense of, well, we all know they're a patient country, but we also know that we have a lot on our table right now. We have a lot of issues happening around the world. We have strike groups being issued out to the Red Sea. We have everything occurring in Israel, right? With all that stuff that we're supporting over there. We have Ukraine and issues in the Black Sea. And we also have everything else we're trying to support with NATO. It's a waiting game. And right now, I think the way it's kind of feeling and the way the U.S. tends to operate is that we might be just defaulting to the status quo of let's just bomb the Middle East, right? That's maybe the default at this point. Where are we going to go to war? Well, these other ones seem really hard, so let's just go back to the Middle East again. Yeah, we can provoke that. No big deal, right? So here we are waiting for that inevitable ballistic missile to actually hit a U.S. destroyer or cruiser or, I mean, probably not a carrier, but I mean, if it did, that'd be really, really bad. And it would definitely move us towards direct conflict, which, I mean, we're pretty much already in. We're bombing targets right now in Yemen. So things are not looking great now, are they? And when I decided to go ahead, one of many said America spread too thin. That's the issue. And I think that's what China's like just enjoying right now, let's just say. We're spread very thin. So what I want to say is that while all this is happening, it doesn't necessarily direct you with exactly what to do in the sense of your preparedness, but it should motivate you to continue to prepare, right? To not get comfortable, to not just be fine with where you're at. And that doesn't have to mean spending money. A lot of people misconstrue getting more prepared as having to cost something, right? Like, oh, well, I don't have any money and I can't get any more food, or I can't, buy any additional fuel, or I can't buy any more equipment, or whatever it might be, right? Or ammunition, who knows what. But you can move forward in your preparedness without those things if you don't have the budget to work with that, which is understandable at this point in time and will only be more and more understandable as things move forward, especially regarding all these additional charges related to shipping. But you can move forward in your preparedness by continually trying to build a network, trying to build a community. You can move forward in your preparedness by restructuring your plans and making sure that you have plans in place for these contingencies. So, for example, I'll give you something you could work on in the sense of homework possibly that might give you a reprieve from trying to get out and, spend more money, which is hard for everyone to do at this point in time, right? Look, I get it. Everyone's at a different level. There's rich people in the chat right now. There are people who have negative balances in their bank account right now. It's everybody, right? So we're talking to everybody here. But here's the thing. You can still move forward, and what you could do is start building out these contingency plans based on these events, okay? So how would you start that process? Well, you could literally say, okay, if we go to war with China, what will I most likely be affected by? And we'll think about that really quickly. All your consumer goods are going to cost more. All your trips to Costco or Walmart or anything like that are going to cost more. Everything will cost more. You will no longer have access to inexpensive goods. You will have to adopt a new mindset. You will no longer be able to rely on consumerism. You'll have to look at the things you already have and start understanding how to maintain them, how to make them last longer, how to possibly repair them once that time comes, right? You won't be able to get a cheap lawnmower anymore. So how can you start building up a tool set, or maybe some additional parts, or maybe the right type of required maintenance items regarding, oil or filters or whatever else to keep that lawnmower up and running for years to come when you can no longer replace it, right? So maybe that's a good start with your contingency plan for war with China. You move over to the Middle East. Okay, war with the Middle East. What does that look like? Well, luckily we have a lot of experience with that, right? So oil gets more expensive. Okay, so how am I going to adapt to this new cost of fuel? How am I going to adapt to this new cost of transportation, right? So what is that going to do to me directly? Of course, it will make everything cost more, just like the China situation, but you'll likely be directly affected more quickly by fuel prices and by things related to oil itself. So we can start moving down that path, and you can say, okay, well, I need to get more fuel reserves, or I need to figure out a different way of approaching my transportation situation, or maybe I need to figure out how to, maybe change my vehicle to something more efficient, whatever it might be, right? So there's your contingency plan to start working on for the Middle East war. And then you can move over to your situation in Eastern Europe. Okay, so Eastern Europe explodes, and then we start having issues when it comes to NATO getting involved and all these other European countries. What does that do to me? How does that directly affect me, right? So you can start looking into what it is you rely on that is a European product, or what it is that you rely on when it comes to Europe being stabilized, because a destabilized Europe could have a lot of consequences for those of us living over here in the United States, right? So understand all these things have their things you can start picking apart and then documenting exactly how that would affect you, and then documenting what your response there would be, or what your necessary changes would be, right? So you don't have to make those changes now in anticipation of something that may not occur, but what you could do is make those changes available to you for when that time comes, and then to enact that plan at that point, right? So for Europe, for example, I think one of the biggest concerns we have with the European crisis is the possible use of like a nuclear weapon, right? Just because of that scenario, everything else related to it, and the fact that there are nuclear facilities there too, like the Zaporizhia plant and everything else that could create a catastrophe of sorts, right? So that makes you think, okay, well, if I need to have access to CBRN protective gear and then all that gets shipped overseas immediately upon some type of a situation, well, that's not going to work out very well for me, right? So those are all contingencies you can have in place. That's what I'm trying to, I guess, permeate here in the community right now, is how can we not just digest this information, but how can we push everything forward, in order to get better prepared, right? Mike H. I zeroed a new AM-15 yesterday. Started out at mechanical zero. After 6 rounds, adjusted the front sight 4 clicks. Ended up putting 224 rounds down range at 85%. Well, I'm glad. And you know what? It's good to get out. It's good to test your stuff. It's good to make sure it's zeroed and ready to go. Because if you do ever need it, you don't want to have to think about what you're going to have to do to get it ready to go at that point in time, right? That could be another contingency plan you have in place. Welcome to my life. Everything is okay. It's just very cold out here, okay? Look, I could remedy it with a propane heater or something along those lines, but the gas makes me nauseous, and at the same time, it's just cold. I don't know what else to say. It's very windy. The wind is permeating my walls, and it's also in the negatives, and I'm doing the best I can here. So I appreciate you all hanging with me. I really do. Let's see here. I owe the bank like $3,000 that I don't have, said Wing It with Ethan. You know what? We're all here, right? Like, this is America right now. A lot of people are probably in the same exact boat as you. We're doing the best we can, okay? And I understand that too. I have video content I'm working on in the future that's going to be budget friendly. I also have video content that will showcase things that are way out of most people's price range, because I'm trying to just expose myself to as much stuff as I can to try to give out the best information I can. And one thing I've learned, and I just want to share this little anecdote with everybody, but one thing I've learned over time is that if you don't have things to compare, then it's hard to know exactly what is and is not worth it, right? So if you don't have like a solar generator to compare to your gas generator, then it's hard to know which one is better for what, right? So in a way, you have to have experience with something high end and something low end to know what it is you're missing out on. And of course, the higher end you go, the more diminished returns you have. But you do eventually hit a threshold where there is a noticeable difference of quality, right? So that's some of the stuff I'm going to be working on here. I want to make sure I can still provide things for everyone, but I also need everyone to understand that I can't only work with things that are inexpensive, and I can't only work with things that are expensive. I'm trying to do the best I can to be well-rounded, right? So I appreciate everyone understanding that and bearing with me, and I hope that I do a good job of that, Let's see. Sterox says, 3rd carrier strike group deployed this week. Details in news chat on the Discord. Okay, good to know. And yeah, maybe I'm just behind on that, but you know what? I'm doing the best I can here, right? So, going negative 2 days before payday is the world we live in. Commander Crypt, 100%. It's just part of the deal at this point in time. Those banks are making those overdraft fees, no problem at all. Now, I'll mention tonight, I'm just not doing the members only chat. I got reasons, man, okay? But I appreciate you all being understanding of that. And I will have an exclusive video, kind of a sneak peek video coming out on Subscribestar here soon. I will put that link in the chat in case you want to join. It's $5 a month, but you get exclusive content, direct communication, preparedness incentives, and at the same time, it's just your way of supporting the channel directly if you feel so inclined to do so. But it is not a requirement by any means. If you do want to do something for me that definitely doesn't cost much, if you want to click the thumbs up, the like button, all that good stuff, you want to subscribe, you want to share this live stream, please do those things, just because getting the message out is the most important part of these conversations, more important than just about anything else. So, ready for whatever, guitar solo? No, but I will be posting some bass licks over on Subscribestar here and there, just because it's for fun. I like playing bass guitar. I'm not very bad at it. Let's just say that much. I've done some things. Don't worry about it, okay? Iran just bombed U.S. and Iraq. 9 U.S. soldiers dead, said United Divide. I am not aware of that, but let's see if we can pull something up on that real quick, because You know what's funny is I know our news outlets aren't going to have that ready to go for us quite yet. So let's see. I'm wondering where that information came from. If you want to tell me in the chat, I can definitely keep an eye out for it really quickly here. United Divide. If you have a source, I would like to see what source that would be. But this is where things are going, everybody. I mean, I'm not surprised by any means, like at all. Like this is just where we're at right now, and it's unfortunate, but you shouldn't be surprised either. This is all kind of predictable, at least it seems to be, in my opinion. Let's see here. Anyway, listen, we gotta stay safe. We gotta stay prepared. Do what you can to get through these difficult months ahead. And as we get closer and closer to this election, it's only going to get more chaotic. These people will stop at nothing to damage us. They're just trying to damage us, and they're damaging us very well. We need more cohesiveness. We need more community, and I honestly, I just don't like it anymore. I wish we could get back to just being America, but they've done a very good job at dividing us and making us care about really unsensible things that don't need to be front and center are pushed front and center, and it's very concerning to me. So I don't see any sources on that either yet, Freedom Uncut. So if you guys have them, please feel free to let everybody know where to look. But you know what? I'm doing the best I can here. So listen, do what you can. Do the best you can as well. Honestly. Like that's what you have to keep in mind too. Don't expect to be at the same level as everybody around you. There are preppers who are way beyond me. I know some of them personally. And you know what? I appreciate them and I respect them for being able to put the work in and have what they have. And I don't envy it. I do try to learn from it though. And I have motivations and I have goals that hopefully push me closer to that eventually. But I'm not there yet. So if I'm not where some of the people I know personally are at, that should tell you it's okay to be where you are too, right? Let's just do the best we can. Anything else y'all need at all, you know where to go, magicprepper.com. And I think we're going to close it out. So that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.